The more I read about history, the more I'm convinced that cruelty often hides behind the word honor, especially when it came to women. A man's reputation could survive war, debt, even murder, but if his wife or lover was accused of being unfaithful, everything collapsed. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about ownership and the punishments. The punishments were meant to remind everyone who really held the power. It's strange when you think about it. We like to imagine that ancient societies were brutal simply because they didn't know better. But the truth is, most of them knew exactly what they were doing. They believed suffering was cleansing, pain made order possible, and when that belief mixed with fear, especially fear of female autonomy, it became something terrifying. Take Babylon, around 1750 BCE. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the oldest surviving legal texts we have, and buried in those stone slabs is a law that chills you to the bone. If a married woman was caught with another man, both were to be bound and thrown into the river, drowned together, as if the water itself would wash away their sin. Some records suggest that husbands could pardon their wives, but most didn't. In those moments, mercy was weakness, and yet, imagine it, the crowd gathering on the riverbank, the murmur of voices, the splash. Justice was carried out in front of everyone. The river didn't just claim the guilty, it reinforced power. It told every woman watching, "Don't you dare." Greece wasn't much gentler. In Athens, a woman accused of adultery could be divorced and stripped of her citizenship. If her husband didn't act, he could be mocked, even fined. The shame wasn't just hers, it reflected on him. That's what always strikes me about these laws. The crime wasn't betrayal itself, it was the embarrassment it caused men. And in Rome, they turned punishment into an institution. The Lex Julia, a law introduced by Augustus, allowed husbands or fathers to kill lovers caught in the act, and sometimes the women too. A father could legally execute his daughter for adultery. A husband could imprison his wife or send her into exile. In a society that prided itself on discipline, even love became regulated. What I find most haunting about these records isn't just the violence, it's how normal it was. These weren't acts of madness, they were procedure, cold, official, public. When we move into medieval Europe, things shift again, but not toward compassion. Punishment became theater. In England, they developed the scold's bridle, an iron mask fitted around a woman's head, with a piece of metal pressing down her tongue. Sometimes it had spikes. The idea was to silence gossip, nagging, or immorality, but it was often used on women accused of adultery, too. They'd be paraded through the streets, jeered at by neighbors, and spat on. It's hard to imagine the humiliation, the fear, and the weight of that metal cutting into skin. And the worst part, this wasn't hidden away in a dungeon. It was a show. People brought their children to watch. In parts of Germany and Austria, they used something called the shrew's fiddle. It clamped a woman's neck and wrists, locking her arms in front of her face. She couldn't feed herself, couldn't wipe her tears, and couldn't even shield her eyes from the stares. Hours could pass before anyone released her. That was considered mercy. Then there was the ducking stool, a wooden chair, a lever, a pond. They'd strap the accused woman in and plunge her repeatedly into cold, filthy water. Sometimes she drowned, sometimes she didn't. If she confessed, she was shamed. If she didn't, she was still guilty. Either way, the spectacle satisfied the crowd. The logic was simple and cruel. Shame restores order. In Puritan New England, the tone was even more unforgiving. Adultery wasn't just a sin, it was a crime. Some women were branded with an A for adultery, a mark burned into the skin or sewn into clothing. Nathaniel Hawthorne later turned that symbol into literature in the Scarlet Letter. But in real life, it wasn't poetic. It was lifelong torment, a scarlet badge that told the world, this woman has transgressed. Others weren't so lucky. Hanging was still on the books in some colonies. Women accused of adultery or moral corruption could face the gallows, a rope, a crowd, a prayer, and silence. In Catholic Europe, particularly during the Renaissance, the Church found subtler ways to destroy women's lives. If you were accused of adultery or simply unholy behavior. You could be locked in a convent for the rest of your life. Some were as young as 20. They'd live behind stone walls, cut off from everyone, forced to repent endlessly for sins that might not even have been proven. One case that stays with me is that of Caterina Dolzinellis in Catalonia. Her own son petitioned to have her confined for her supposed immorality. The church agreed. She spent years locked away, silenced, not for a crime of violence or theft, but for stepping outside the line drawn by men. And yet, even confinement wasn't the worst fate. In parts of the Islamic world, during medieval and early modern times, women accused of adultery could be stoned to death. The Quran itself doesn't command stoning, but over centuries, certain interpretations of Sharia law permitted it. A woman buried up to her chest, pelted by those she knew, until the body gave out. In Iran and Afghanistan, it still happens, though often in secret now. I've read witness accounts that make you sick to the stomach. The way the crowd begins in silence, then erupts. History echoes in those stones. Across Africa and Asia, traditions varied, but the idea was the same. Punishment had to be public. It wasn't enough to punish the individual. You had to teach the lesson. In some tribal communities, a woman caught cheating might be whipped, mutilated, or even sold. The purpose wasn't just revenge. It was deterrence, fear as social glue. And you know what's interesting? These same societies rarely punished men in the same way. A husband could cheat, even boast about it, without consequence. That double standard runs deep, even into the 19th century. When European colonial courts encountered adultery laws abroad, they often reinforced them instead of reforming them. The idea that women's morality had to be controlled was too useful to abandon. When you trace these threads across cultures, what emerges isn't just brutality, it's control. Every device, every ritual, every law was designed to remind women that their bodies didn't belong to them. The real crime wasn't adultery, it was autonomy. And that's what makes studying this so unsettling. Because once you start recognizing that pattern, punishment disguised as protection, cruelty disguised as order, you start seeing it everywhere. Not just in the past, but in the quiet expectations that still shape how women are judged today. Even now, in some parts of the world, so-called honor killings happen when a woman is accused of infidelity, sometimes without proof, sometimes over gossip. It's Hammurabi's river, just without the ritual. The same fear, the same logic, the same need to control. I often think about those crowds, the ones who watched the ducking stools, the drownings and the stonings. Did they truly believe they were witnessing justice, or was it about power disguised as righteousness? That question never leaves me. Maybe because it's not just a historical one. The past has a cruel way of reflecting us at ourselves. We may no longer strap women into iron masks or throw them into rivers, but the instinct to punish, to shame, to silence hasn't vanished. It's only changed its form. History forces us to look, even when it's uncomfortable. Maybe that's why I keep coming back to these stories. Because behind every law and every lesson, there was a person, a woman whose name is lost, whose pain was public, and whose silence was enforced. And maybe remembering them, speaking their names aloud, is a small act of justice in itself.